Episode 191 of CppCast, recorded March 20th, 2019. The sponsor of this episode of CppCast is PVS Studio. PVS Studio is a static application security testing tool for detecting errors and potential vulnerabilities in the source code of programs written in C, C++, C#, and Java. In this episode, I talked to members of the Visual C++ team. We talk about recent improvements in VS Code. And we talk all about the upcoming Visual Studio 2019 release. Welcome to episode 191 of CppCast, the first podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Irving, and for this episode, I was in Redmond, Washington for the Microsoft MVP Summit, so I had a chance to sit down with several members of the Visual C++ team. We talked about Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio 2019, and the state of Visual C++ conformance with the standard. Here is the interview.
Why don't we go around the room and introduce ourselves? Simon.
Hi, my name is Simon. I guess this is my third time on the show.
Yeah.
So I'm now working on the C++ team at Microsoft. I'm their developer advocate, which means I'm in charge of community stuff and our blogs, making sure that we're helping people, that people know what to expect from our tools and all that stuff.
Okay. And Simon, so like you said, we had you on 2 times before. I think we had you on just a month or 2 before CppCon. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess so.
And you joined Microsoft right after we had you on. How's it been going so far? Is the implant installed and everything?
Yeah, it's been really great. It's, the implant is definitely working.
Okay.
It's been very, very different from what I was doing before, because previously I was just this is the compiler backend and you were working on this and this is the only thing you're doing. Whereas now it's lots of different bits and pieces and trying to kind of form my own idea of what I should be doing. And but I get to spend a lot of time helping people and doing stuff which I was doing in my spare time already. So yeah, Awesome. It's been really great.
Okay.
Hello, I am Marian Luparu. I am the program manager lead for the C++ team. So I'm working on general Visual Studio support for C++, helping with Visual Studio Code and VC package in general. And I'm very thrilled to have Simon part of the team. Also have Tara joining us, the team as well. So you want to introduce yourself, Tara?
Sure. Thanks, Marian. I'm Tara Raj. I'm a program manager on the C++ team, currently focusing on Visual Studio Code and VC package. Previous to this, I was at Microsoft working on the Windows subsystem for Linux and SQL Server on Linux. So, as you could imagine, working on a lot of Linux-y things.
Okay. We have talked about the Windows subsystem on Linux a couple times on the show. Anything interesting going on there between what you were working on and Visual Studio Code?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of integrations that are happening between WSL and Visual Studio Code, especially if you're on Windows and you want to target a Linux environment.
Okay, Awesome.
Hi, I'm Bob Brown. I'm the engineering manager for the C++ experiences in Visual Studio Code and also in Visual Studio.
Okay. So I guess Bob and Tara, we can start off by talking to you about some of the changes coming to Visual Studio Code. So, in just 2 weeks, I think we're getting the big Visual Studio 2019 update, but Visual Studio Code has kind of been getting more continuous updates over the past few months. Is that right?
That's right. We try to release the extension every month or 2. So we put out an update with new features. We've got, in recent months, we put out document comment support. We're now working on IntelliSense caching or AutoPCH, as Visual Studio users might be familiar with, to improve the performance and the speed of IntelliSense features such as autocomplete, browsing, quick info tooltips and features like that.
Okay. Can we talk about some of the big features that are just Visual Studio Code in general? I know Live Share is a pretty big thing that's coming to Visual Studio and is also going to be in Visual Studio Code. Is that right?
That's right. Is there anything specific you'd like to know about LiveShare?
I mean, can you just describe the experience? Because we
sure.
maybe have talked about it a little bit on the show, but not in depth.
Sure. LiveShare gives you a collaborative session. You can basically share a developer who is working on a code project, if they want to be able to share their project with another developer who may not be in the same room as them. They could be in the same room, or they could be, on the other side of the country or across the world. They can set up a collaborative session, which allows both developers to see the same code, get the same IntelliSense experience, and debug. They get to do basically everything you can do in VS Code or Visual Studio across this collaborative session.
Okay, and this can be VS Code to VS Code or VS Code to Visual Studio.
That's correct.
In any direction. Okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And if I, have a code base that I'm working on, does the other developer have to also have that code base checked out? How does it work exactly?
No, that's the great thing about LiveShare is basically the IntelliSense features are all powered by the host. So whoever is creating the shared session is the one who hosts basically everything. And when the collaborator who is connected to the session wants to see anything in that workspace or in that project, those requests basically get sent to the host, and the relevant information gets sent back to the collaborator. So they don't have to clone the entire repository. They don't have to have the same project. They don't have to have the code files on their physical machine. All of that stuff is served through the LiveShare session.
So if I don't have the code on my machine and I want to start kind of poking around in it, does it just kind of serve me those files on the
Exactly.
fly?
That's exactly how it works. So the message is like you can scroll through the file. You don't have to be looking at the exact same section of code that the host is looking at. You can look anywhere in the project that you'd like to.
I guess, do we want to talk a little bit more about some of the C++ extension features, productivity enhancements?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bob mentioned a couple of the big features that we had come in, one of which was documentation comments and auto PCH. So to go into a little bit more detail on auto PCH, which stands for auto precompile headers, what we're doing there is it's essentially IntelliSense caching.
Okay.
And what that allows for is if you have a large file with many headers, by precompiling them, we can actually populate our IntelliSense recommendations much quicker. And that definitely falls into our productivity category where you have your IntelliSense populated much quicker than we previously showed them to you. And in addition to that, another experience that we're working on is the configuration experience. We understand that to get started with C++, it takes a lot. You need to have a compiler, a build system, and things like that. So
you need to kind of configure all those things by hand, like
exactly.
The path to your compiler, what you want to call to invoke at the compiler, things like that.
Exactly, yeah. And if you're a first-time user or a student, that makes your life that much more difficult to get started. And especially if you're using Visual Studio Code and you just want to get started quickly, that's a barrier for you to get started with C++. So something that we just introduced in our March update is to build and debug an active file. So if you have a file open, all you need to do is hit F5 and we generate your tasks and your launch file. We help configure that for you and you just get building and debugging right away.
That sounds awesome. What else is new with Visual Studio Code? I saw something about the Insiders program.
Yeah, the Insiders program is something that most extensions as well as Visual Studio Code offer. Okay. So the Insiders program for the C++ extension is so that you can get some of our quick updates as soon as we check them in. So we have anywhere from 2 to 3 Insiders builds before we have a release. So as Bob mentioned, we release monthly, bi-monthly, somewhere in that about 6-week range. Okay. And so as insiders, you can get updates every few weeks. And this is really helpful for us because as we're developing features, we want to know if there are certain cases that maybe we hadn't considered, or if there are regressions, painful bugs for you, or just experiences that you really enjoy. And we want to see how much you enjoy them. And if you're using them, it's great for us to get that early feedback just to make the extension as awesome as possible.
Nice. And We've definitely talked about this on the show before, but Visual Studio Code is available on which platforms?
It's available on Windows, Mac OS, as well as most Linux distros.
Okay, that's great. Anything else we haven't talked about yet that you want to bring up?
Yeah, so one of the things we've been looking at with our survey feedback is that many of our users are looking to integrate their build systems and other things. Configuration is something that comes up repeatedly in our surveys. They want to be able to get coding faster, so that's where this build and run active file feature came from. Another thing that's challenging for a lot of people is configuration. I want to include a header file and I want it to just work. I don't want to have to go through all of the pain of searching for the repository that owns that header file or that library and download all the pieces myself. I've used it before. I just want to simply, tell the extension to just go find it for me and bring it down. So one of our areas of investment is going to be integrating more closely with CppCast. Other feedback that we've seen is that people want better integration with build systems like Make and CMake. So those are other experiences that we are implementing into our extension, just to do the configuration for the IntelliSense. They've already done it before. They've already configured their Make and their CMake files. They don't want to have to go through and configure yet this extension again when they've already done it. And the experience they expect is already coded up in their build system. So integrating more tightly with these build systems allows them to have a cleaner experience.
And this will all be in the Visual Studio Code C++ extension, or are there like another extension for CMake?
There already is an extension for CMake, and we do integrate with that particular extension. So we have an API that allows us to send them a message and say, hey, what's the configuration for this particular source file? And they'll send that information back to us. So we do have integration with a CMake tools extension. It's fairly popular.
Anything else we haven't talked about with VS Code yet?
Yeah, so something that we also have planned that Bob had mentioned is CppCast integration. And CppCast is a C++ package manager, and it's cross-platform as well. So the plan here is to get that integrated into our VS Code extension. And an experience that this might look like is, let's say you have a header file, but you don't actually have that package installed. This would allow you to simply use CppCast in the back end to install that library for you. So
just by seeing the header file, CppCast is able to try to go and find out what the missing package is and grab it for you?
Yeah, it can find the missing package for you and we can grab that. And there would be a little bit of an installation or configuration experience in the back end. And we're still working through the details of what this might look like, but the fact that we could integrate CppCast into the extension, we see a lot of potential there to make your package management experience just a lot more seamless.
Right. And CppCast also, I think, started off on Windows, but also now has full Linux and Mac support. Is that right?
Yep. It's cross-platform, so it works on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and across all of those platforms as well.
Okay. Sounds great. I wanted to interrupt the discussion for just a moment to bring you word from our sponsors. PVS Studio performs static code analysis and issues warnings for fragments of code that are likely to contain errors and potential vulnerabilities. The tool supports the C, C++, C#, and Java programming languages. At the moment, PVS Studio has 422 diagnostics for C and C++, which enable you to detect dereferencing of null pointers, array-bound violations, typos, dead code, resource leaks, and other kinds of errors. PVS Studio supports working with Visual C++, GCC, client compilers, as well as a number of compilers for embedded systems. The analyzer works in the Windows, Linux, and macOS environments. Follow the links in the description to 2 new posts from the PVS Studio team. The first one suggests checking your skills to find errors. For the second one, you can read about a non-obvious case of an analyzer false positive. Okay, so let's move on to Visual Studio, which has a big release coming out when?
The big release is April 2.
Okay.
So there's going to be a live event that people can tune in and hear everything about Visual Studio 2019. It's only in September last year at CppCon they were still talking about 2017 update 9 and everything that comes with it, like just my code debugging and step back and other cool features. But in in the meantime, the team was already busy working on Visual Studio 2019. So 2019 is really full of new features, improvements in compiler, improvements in the libraries, obviously IDE productivity. So we're really excited to head over to April 2nd and talk with everyone about this.
I was looking back at past episodes, and it was almost exactly 100 episodes ago that we had Daniel Moth on to talk about the Visual Studio 2017 release. And I think I had you and Kenny on a couple weeks after that. So what would you say are like kind of the big Visual Studio 2019 features that listeners may not have heard about yet?
That may not have heard about. Well, if you follow our blog, I think some of them may not be surprises to you, but kind of the big improvements in 2019 would be live share is something that came up with the Visual Studio Code conversation we were just having.
Right.
This is a major boost in team productivity that we think is gonna move the needle in bringing the teams together, even they're located in the same office space or geographically in different places. This kind of reduces the barrier of that collaboration. There is we always make improvements in build throughput. So, for example, we just announced that we have linker improvements that go to make linker faster by an order of magnitude of 2.4x compared with 2017. Which in 2017 we also announced that it's around 2x improvements compared with the previous release. So we keep making big improvements like that. It's always worth to upgrade. There are always things we add, and we can go in more details about the productivity features. But something that I want to bring up is an important point of every time we ship a new release, people may perceive that as a barrier of adopting and moving between releases. So we actually take that very, very seriously, and we put a lot of effort in making sure that 2019 release is a friction-free upgrade for people coming from 2017. So from basic things like you can install 2019 side by side, to more advanced scenarios like using the old toolset that shipped in 2017 that you may still depend on inside the 2019 IDE, so you can take advantage of all the IDE features while still shipping your product on the version that you locked in.
Yeah, so I actually did that myself with Visual Studio 2017. I'm still using the 2015 C++ compiler on some projects. So you're saying with 2019, I can choose to use the 2017 compiler or maybe even the 2015 compiler?
You can even choose the 2015 compiler. We want to make it as easy as possible of a decision for you to move to 2019 and take advantage of all the IDE features.
Right.
And not only that, but if the reason why you're staying behind with 2015, it's not because your product already shipped, but let's say it's because you have a third-party dependency that it's locked on a specific binary tied with the vCredis from that version. You can actually compile all your code with 2019 toolset. You could consider moving if that's your choice, because we do have binary compatibility between all these three versions of the toolsets. So 2015, 2017, and 2019, you can really mix binaries, build them with different toolsets. As long as you ship the latest vCredis that come with 2019, mix and matching should work just fine. So really, kind of the high level point of this conversation about upgrade is, if you have any second thoughts or you're nervous about upgrading, you shouldn't be. There's a lot of dials in 2019 to make it as easy for you to move to the latest version and take advantage of all the improvements.
Okay. Sounds great. Do you want to dig more into some like the C++ specific productivity improvements?
Absolutely. So I was mentioning the build throughput improvements. So 2.4x linker throughput improvements. Kind of the toolset brings runtime performance improvements as well. We recently did some work in using the SSA optimizer to also optimize the vector intrinsics. So that brings around 2.8% improvement in like general code basis. So by just upgrading and recompiling your code, you can take those benefits if your code is amenable to auto vectorization, or your source code actually uses the vector intrinsics itself. And speaking of vectorization, and SIMD in general, we added support for OpenMP So it's not a full support for OpenMP 4.5. We only implemented the SIMD part of it, but that is specifically geared to ML libraries that are making heavy usage of that. So by just recompiling and enabling those OpenMP SIMD extensions in our compiler, you can get the benefit of the performance throughput that you get at runtime. There's a lot more improvements in the compiler backend. So just recompile and get more stuff for free. That's always great.
Yeah.
And then as you move into the IDE, there's a lot of support, for example, for code analysis. We added a lot more rules for our core checkers. So, for example, concurrency checks and the coroutines now have rules inside the static analysis to kind of catch those kind of easy mistakes that you can make with co-await, where you capture by references and then you co-await and your reference may be dangling at that point because, coroutines can move around. So you don't want to rely on that. Those kind of checks would be available. And yeah.
Not to cut you off, but coroutines are still like in an experimental stage, right?
Correct. They're still the TS, but since they got approved in C++20, we're very excited about that. So now, coming in maybe an update will probably take them out of experimental flag, and they will be fully supported as a C++20 feature. I believe the implementation we have in the compiler is pretty close to what it's in the C++ standard.
Okay.
But the thing that I'm most excited when it comes to code analysis is the fact that all of those rules that we invest in and we're trying to make your code, analyzing your code and raising those issues that might be hiding in your code, we bring them in the editor now. So we have on by default the ability to run code analysis in the background. And as you code, you'll get squiggles in the editor telling you about this error. So in the past, with previous releases, you would have had to build with /analyze on the command line.
Right.
That is not the case anymore. It's sort of, it comes for free. We're bringing that information to you and only for the files that you're actively editing.
Okay.
It's not like a list of an overwhelming list of issues that you would get from your 2 million lines of code if you throw /analyze at build time. This is geared towards the changes you're actively making in the editor.
That sounds helpful.
Yeah. Let's see. What else do we have? I'm sure I'm going to forget a few things, but I'm not going to forget any of them at the launch event, the 2nd of April. So I'd like to invite everyone to tune into that. We're going to have some cool demos there. Let's see. Another one is the out-of-proc debugger. So one of the challenges we had with symbols in the debugging is that bringing them inside the memory, you would run out of memory. So for really, really large projects, this is not something that happens with regular size projects, but this was a problem for large ASVs, large code bases. So now, by default, all of those symbols go into an out-of-proc process, well, it's another process that loads those symbols and brings that information inside VS and basically keeps the memory usage a lot lower.
Okay.
Other than that, there's obviously the productivity features that help you write faster code. So things that you would normally can do yourself, but it's sort of cumbersome to get through the process of writing that. So, for example, you start using a symbol and you have to go to the top and do a pound include of that header. Now Visual Studio can kind of knows or learns where that type is defined and suggests which header to add automatically, like an auto fix it. You just do control space and that fix is going to get in there.
Okay, so this isn't just, you type out, vector int and it suggests you go and include the vector header.
It does that too.
It will do that, but it'll also go and find, the correct header for some type that's within your code base?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So you bring in a new type, it will suggest the header that is defined, and then it will use some heuristics to kind of pick the public header from the kind of the include graph that we bring in. So even for third-party libraries, it would work. It will probably work, and we're trying to do our best to not bring in like internal headers from that library as suggestions for pound include. And would love people to try it and give us the feedback.
What if it's a type that might be defined in multiple headers?
When that happens, we would probably list all of those options.
Oh, okay.
And then you get to make your own decision.
So like include stood string or include boost string, something like that, the header for either of those.
Yeah, if for example, if you don't qualify the namespace,
Right.
then it would be ambiguous. So it would probably suggest both. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we would also you reminded me that there's also using namespace qualifications. So if you just name a type without a namespace, we would suggest to either using namespace as well, not only the pound include for that type. Or if you want to use fully qualified names, we just replace the type name with a fully qualified name with a full namespace rather than using, depending on your preference.
Right.
So yeah, those are some of the things in 2019 release. Other than that, we're doing work on cross-platform development. That's something that we talked in the past. One of the important scenarios we want to make sure is that Visual Studio is good for you to develop not only for targeting Windows, but also for targeting other platforms, Linux, iOS, Mac, and then Android. So in 2019, we're evolving that work that we started in 2017 with the CMake integration. You don't have to generate solutions in projects in VS. You could just point to the CMake list.txt, and we'll do all the work. Visual Studio will do all the work behind to kind of collect the information needed for the ID, the IntelliSense information, how to build the CMake project, how to debug the CMake targets. And
since you brought it up, I'm not a CMake expert, but the CMake integration is getting better. Is that right?
Correct. So it was available in 2017. And the thing that we're actively working on right now is to bring a lot more helpers for you to write CMake projects inside the IDE. So for example, there's a targets view that lists all the targets. You don't get only like the disk view with all the CMake list.txt. You can navigate the CMake targets that you have defined with the explicit files that are coming in as part of that target for the particular configurations you target. So for example, in a target, you could have conditionals of, say, this file only comes when I target Windows, this other file comes when I target Linux, and so on. There's a view inside Solution Explorer that, depending on the configurations you're actively targeting right now, would filter that. So you can only, you get to see what's going on at build or what files are accessible or not. On the other hand, we're also working on integrating a lot of the functionality in VS that is available today for MS Build projects to also make it available for CMake. So not everything lights up today, full disclosure, but we're making great progress. For example, just my code that I was mentioning at the beginning that we added in 15.9 2017, now in 2019 is also available for CMake projects.
Okay, and can we go into what exactly just my code is?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is the ability to, when you step through code, even when you're stepping into, to step over the code that is not yours. So you
don't want to step through the standard library. Exactly.
That's, I think, the primary scenario that comes up. You don't want to go into the guts of the algorithm implementation, but if you have a Lambda that you call often for the sorting algorithm, you want to step into that and something goes wrong with the sorting. And you can always opt out of that. Like if you really, really want to, find Stefan's bugs, you would go in the library. It's easy to.
Stefan doesn't write bugs, does he?
I don't think so. But we always live and learn. So. Yeah. So the CMake support is improving, and one of the things that we work very hard is responding to customer feedback. So we have lots of customers coming in, trying the CMake experience, giving us the feedback. We're working very hard to resolve all the developer community issues that get reported, and I feel that the experience is vastly improving, and I think I'm very excited to get more feedback from the people. So please keep the feedback coming.
Okay. I think one thing we talked about with one of the 2017 updates was template IntelliSense, but that's also getting some improvements in 2019.
Absolutely, that's something that we're going to continue working on it, and it's part of our efforts to help C++ developers write as modern C++ code as possible. Templates is not something new, but this was a sort of limitations of every idea out there that inside a template, when you're writing the template body, it's very hard to kind of understand the type information, because it's very like, it's just a T and you know nothing about it.
T could be anything.
Yeah, exactly. And most of the times people do know kind of what some T's could be, and even if you instantiate a template, you do not get in the instantiation place, you don't get the help to write the template body. So that's basically what template IntelliSense is. Allows you to go inside a template definition and say T could be int, or it could be string, or it could be some other type that is your user type. And you can try to see how the template behaves if the template gets instantiated with that specific type. So then when you're in the site template body, you could do like bar dot, and if bar is of type T, you'd get the string members if that's what you try to instantiate it with. And that was available in 2017 as well. With 2019, what we're working on, we just added support for nested templates, so you can nest as deep as you want to go, and then specify the multiple levels of template arguments that you get from the code, basically how it's defined. We also honor default arguments, which was something that we didn't do in 2017, unfortunately. But you don't have to specify an argument again. We're just going to default to that. And we also remember your choices. So if you tried your template with multiple, sets of arguments, then you will all see them in the list, and you can often switch between them. You don't have to kind of retype them. So we're working on the usability of the feature.
Okay.
There's more things coming in this space, and that would go beyond what we have in the RTW release that we're going to release on April 2nd. One of the most requested features is the ability to kind of scout through the code and find all the instantiations for the given template that you're working on.
Just try to autocomplete it for you.
Yeah, and kind of list those for you to pick rather than you having to define them yourself.
Okay. What else can we talk about with regards to productivity improvements? Step backwards is new, right?
That was actually in 2017
oh, was
as
it?
well.
Okay.
It is an enterprise-only feature. But yeah, it basically allows you to step back, really. While debugging, we take process snapshots, and it's not a sort of a gimmickry of moving the execution point in the debugger. It actually gives you the full context of all the local variables of the whole heap space that you had at the time where the process snapshot was taken. So you can go back between breakpoints if you have multiple breakpoints. And if you remember, let me check what the variable was that I forgot to check when I hit the first breakpoint. That's very easy to navigate back and forth.
Is there any limit to like how far backwards you can go?
There's a limit of memory. So we will take snapshots, and if the memory conditions are not satisfactory, we will probably drop some of the snapshots that are oldest. So I think there might be an upper limit of 100 snapshots as well.
That's a lot, though.
Yeah, it should be enough to get started. But that this is the kind of feature that will also we're able to tweak it if needed. So we're waiting for customer feedback to hear more about how people are making use of this, how successful they are, if something doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, something else that it's available in 2019 is IntelliCode. So this is the AI-based IntelliSense support. And that's something that you need to get as an extension to 2019. One of the reasons, tactical reasons why we do that is because we work so fast at iterating over the model that we give users, such that the AI suggestions are relevant to them. We often add more libraries that we train on. So we're kind of shipping it out of band and kind of bringing updates outside the cycle of Visual Studio. And we're going to keep doing that until we're very happy with kind of the level of coverage that IntelliCode can provide. So
what exactly does IntelliCode do for you?
So if, for example, if you're in a for, like one example would be, and you're using a vector, if you're in the starting point, you're probably going to get suggested the begin method of the vector. And if you're in the condition phase, you're going to probably get suggested the end method for vector. Because of the way we run the training, we see that's a common pattern that people would use that code and kind of the sequence of calls that they would make for that type. This is the kind of suggestions that you usually get. So it's not limited to just vector, but basically for all the code bases that we train on, we may suggest a common pattern. So let's say in an if you check the size, and then inside the if you would probably access a member. So you would maybe get the suggestion for .at to be at the top rather than all the other 1,000 methods that an STL type would have. And things like that. So
can you tell us how many types of open source libraries you're training this on? I mean, STL usage, Boost, what else are you training it on?
So that's we have I think about 100 code bases that we train on. The interesting bit with that is that when we train on those code bases, it's not necessarily that we're going to get information about how those code bases are being used. So the best information we can give you is about STL usage, because for all the libraries that we train on, those libraries use STL. So then this is how the AI parsing basically handles detecting patterns of library usage. So if we add other libraries, for example, for training that use Boost, then we're going to have even better suggestions for Boost. And that's really what we're working on. It's finding those code bases that consume the library that we want to give better suggestions for.
Is there ever going to be a way to train it on my code? So, if I have a whole bunch of types and I want it to, auto predict how I use those types, is that going to be doable?
Yeah. And that's something that we're working on right now. Basically, the training code, we're working on packaging it up and making it available as part of the VS IDE and as part of the DevOps experience as well, to say, I want to train on my code base and then I want to download the model to kind of augment the model that Microsoft ships with. So then, basically you'd get suggestions for, a 2 million lines of code base of what are the patterns that are coming out of that.
Okay. Any concerns are going to program us all out of our jobs?
I don't think so. But what we want to make you is as productive as possible and write as correct code as possible.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be concerned about that.
Okay. Anything else we haven't talked about yet with VS 2019?
I'm a big fan of the the back end stuff that we've been doing that we haven't mentioned. There's a new, more aggressive inlining switch. So obviously, inlining is super important for C++ because it's one of the main ways in which we remove the cost of abstractions from your code. And what we don't want people doing is just writing force inline everywhere because the compiler's heuristics didn't quite get it right. Because then, we're making users make decisions which maybe they made the wrong decision, but
the compiler might know what it's doing.
Yeah. So what we're giving now is we have this -OB3 switch, which tells the inliner to be more aggressive, inline more, so the users don't have to just annotate everything with force inline. They can just say, okay, well, we'll try out this new switch. We'll see if it buys us some performance. We can turn it on, we can turn it off, and play around. So it gives people a bit more control over the inliner behavior without having to do a bunch of extra work.
Right.
Another really great thing is a new exception handling metadata scheme. So that this is the information which is encoded in the binary for unwinding the stack and doing all that nonsense. We tried to optimize how all of this is stored so that because having a bunch of information in your binary, can bloat it up and cause all these problems that people love to complain about. So we tried to optimize the size of this data as much as possible. So we brought it down 60%. It made it 60% smaller.
Okay.
So if your program's using a lot of exception handling, then you can see some really
significant reduces of size.
So we're seeing if you have heavy exception handling usage, you could see even a 20% binary size reduction, which I'm really, really excited about. So that's under a compiler switch So if you can try it out in your programs and see if you get improvements, and let us know.
One thing I just realized we haven't talked about yet is conformance. So I know over the Visual Studio 2017 release cycle, you guys kept getting more and more conformant. What's going to be the state of 2019 with regards to C++ 11, 14, 17 conformance?
Yeah, so in 17 we've been done for since Visual Studio 2017 in terms of C++ 17 conformance. For C++ 20 conformance, we're going to be shipping partial support for the spaceship operator. So this is the three-way comparison operator is the official terminology, I guess, but I like spaceships. So there's still changes which have been made to the behavior of three-way comparisons, and there's still changes being made in standards meetings. So we haven't we're not fully up to date with all of the most recent modifications to the papers, but we have the kind of initial support which was proposed and is going to be in C++ 20. So
and if you want to use that, that's behind a certain flag, right? Like stood C++ latest or something like that?
Yep. Yeah, so it's under, if you pass /stood C++ latest, then yeah, you'll get that. There's the three comparison operator, for people who don't know, is like I think it's most useful in giving you a way to automatically generate your own comparison operators for your types without you having to write everything. So you can just write spaceship operator equals default, and it will generate lexicographic comparison operators for your types, which I think is people miss that because they see, oh, it's like a new operator and you can compare things. But no, this is like a really great feature. It'll help people not have to write so much code, so much boilerplate. Some other things we've been working on is feature test macros. So this is a way to query what features are available in your implementation, so that you can then make programmatic decisions about what features you're using and things like that, and configure your build properly. So that's fully supported in 2019.
Okay.
A small, simple one is remove cvref. So this is a type trait which previously people have been using std decay all the time to remove references and CV qualifiers from types. But the problem with that is decay does more work than you need to do. Mm-hmm. So it affects compile times, and we don't really want that. So std remove cvref was added, and we now have support for this as well. So there was I don't know if you saw the about aggregate initialization, where you can kind of if you have a user, if you delete constructors, for example, you can kind of sneak underneath them by using aggregate initialization. It's like I say, well, I don't want anyone to be able to construct this type in this way, and you say, oh well, I'll just use braces, and if your type qualifies as an aggregate, then hey, it just works, which is kind of weird. So we fixed that in the standard, and now we support that in the compiler as well. So you can stop people constructing your types in ways which you don't want them to, which is nice.
Okay.
Also, big ones is more work on modules and coroutines. So the
support for that has been in there for a while because it was being worked on from people at Microsoft, right, on your team.
Yep. Yeah, so we've had all of us under experimental compiler flags for a while, but we've been doing a lot of work to make sure that we're because there's been a lot of changes to modules, there's been changes to coroutines, to all of these big features. So we're trying to work towards getting parity with what the standard says, rather than just what our older implementation was. So there's been a lot of work in that area as well.
Do Gabby and Gore get to go on a big vacation now or something? Features are voted in?
I hope so. That would be nice.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else we haven't gone over yet?
I think we covered pretty much all that's coming. I'm sure I forgot something, but like I said, I'm not going to forget it for the second April release. I'd say that we're working on a lot of exciting stuff beyond the April 2 release as well. For 2017, we had 9 updates. For 2019, we haven't released how many we're going to have, but we are working on update 1 as we speak right now, and more updates are going to come, and we're going to have more exciting announcements at Build Conference later this year. Around our cross-platform development. And
is Build before or after the April 2 release?
It's after. So April is the RTW release, and then by Build, I think we may have an update 1 available for people to try on with even more exciting features. And we're going to continue working on C++20 as well throughout the year and throughout 2020 as well, probably. But we're very excited that we have, modules and coroutines to start with, and concepts are being worked on right now. Nothing to announce yet, but we're gonna keep people posted throughout the year as we make progress on C++20.
Okay. Since we're talking about C++20 at the end, maybe we can finish off by just you telling me what some of your favorite features are with C++20.
Favorite features?
Anything you're really looking forward to?
I look forward to seeing modules integrated as in all the C++ build systems.
Okay.
That's going to be some work, but it's interesting work. And once we get there, I think going to make modules a lot easier to use. Concepts excites me a lot because once they're going to be under ranges will be a much easier to use library. So hopefully more and more people are going to use ranges. And I'm going to pass the baton to Simon, which I'm sure he's excited about.
Yeah, well, of course I'm excited about my own paper, which is hopefully going to get in extensions to std optional for composing functions, which will operate inside of on the value inside the optional, or you can compose functions which will return optionals, and kind of it stops you from having that problem where if you have a bunch of functions which are returning optionals, then you have to call a function, check if it returned null opt, call another function, check if it returned null opt. So you end up just having all of this boilerplate code to check the current state of the optional, and it has to be mixed in with all of your actual logic. And so what this interface allows you to do is just say, okay, I want to do all of these operations, and if any of these returns an empty optional, then the rest are just going to be no ops. Okay. So that's made it through to the library working group as of last meeting. So
could still be voted into C++20 because it made it through the working group?
Yeah, so it's if it's in LWG now, then it's kind of been voted for approval for C++20. Just needs to get the wording all approved so it can get merged in. So hopefully next meeting, if all goes well, that can get in. Yeah, so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about all of the big features, especially ranges. I'm totally blanking on a lot of the smaller changes. Just there's so many things going in C++20 now. But
it's looking like it's going to be a very large release.
Yeah, I think definitely even larger than C++11.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a massive change in how we program C++.
Okay. Well, it's been great having you both on the show. Thanks for telling me all about Visual Studio 2019. And the date to remember is
April 2nd.
Okay.
Thank you for having us in your show.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much for listening in as we chat about C++. We'd love to hear what you think of the podcast. Please let us know if we're discussing the stuff you're interested in, or if you have a suggestion for a topic, we'd love to hear about that too. You can email all your thoughts to feedback@cppcast.com. We'd also appreciate if you can like CppCast on Facebook and follow CppCast on Twitter. You can also follow me at Rob W. Irving and Jason at Lefticus on Twitter. We'd also like to thank all our patrons who help support the show through Patreon. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/cppcast. And of course, you can find all that info and the show notes on the podcast website at cppcast.com. Theme music for this episode was provided by podcastthemes.com. At cppcast.com. Theme music for this episode was provided by podcastthemes.com.